That man broke into private land because he thought there was a fortune beneath it. Grant Hollis's voice carried across the packed red hollow meeting hall, sharp enough to silence the last whisper in the room. Every face turned toward Cole Mercer, who stood alone beneath the yellow lights with Ranger seated at his left side. On the evidence table between them rested a tarnished brass compass, its glass cracked, its needle trembling though no one had touched it. Cole did not answer the accusation. He only looked down when Ranger's ears moved forward and the dog fixed his attention on the compass as if it were still trying to point somewhere. To understand how Cole had ended up before a crowd that had already been told what to believe, the story had to return 3 weeks, to a freezing morning when he owned almost nothing except an old pickup, 2 canvas bags, and the German shepherd riding quietly beside him. Cole had once built decks, repaired barns, and kept 6 men working through the worst months of winter. Then a lawsuit arrived from a development company he had never dealt with. A supplier withdrew his credit. 2 clients canceled on the same afternoon. Within 90 days, his business account was empty, his rented house was gone, and every tool that would bring a fair price had been sold. The papers called it a contract dispute. Cole knew only that the signatures used against him were not his, and the attorney who promised to investigate stopped returning calls after one meeting. He drove west until the gas gauge sat near empty and a handwritten note from an old service friend led him to a neglected caretaker cabin 8 miles outside Red Hollow, Montana. The cabin leaned slightly toward a line of pines. Cold air came through the window frames, the wood stove smoked, and the nearest grocery store was 22 miles away. Still, it had a roof, a hand pump that worked after 6 hard pulls, and enough floor space for Ranger to stretch beside the stove. Cole set 2 metal cups on the counter by habit, stared at them for a moment, then returned one to the cabinet. Ranger watched without moving. The next morning, before sunrise had cleared the eastern ridge, they followed an old service road through snow that reached above Cole's boots. Wind moved through the pines with the low sound of distant surf. Ranger usually walked several yards ahead, testing the trail, circling back whenever Cole slowed. That morning he stopped near a frozen slope and sat completely still. Cole gave a quiet command. Ranger did not move. His eyes remained on a patch of snow beneath a bent cedar. Cole stepped closer and noticed that the dog was not afraid. Ranger's breathing was steady, but every part of him was focused. Cole knelt and brushed aside the loose snow with one gloved hand. At first he found only stones and dead grass. Then his fingers struck metal. He pulled free a brass compass no wider than his palm. Its leather strap had rotted away, but the case was heavy and finely made. A shallow mark had been carved into the back, a symbol like 2 mountain peaks divided by a straight line. Cole opened the lid. Beneath the cracked glass, tucked so tightly against the rim that it almost looked like part of the lining, was a folded photograph. The image showed 2 younger men standing beside a mud-streaked vehicle under a washed-out desert sky. One was Cole. The other was Daniel Reed, the teammate whose funeral Cole had attended 12 years earlier. Cole's hand stopped in the cold. The photograph had never been printed. He remembered the moment because Daniel had taken it with Cole's own camera, and the memory card had been lost before they returned home. Ranger rose, but did not step forward. Instead, he turned his head toward the hillside behind the cedar. A woman's voice came from the road above them. "That dog has been waiting for you." Cole looked up. An elderly woman stood beside an old pickup, one hand resting on the open door. Her gray hair lifted in the wind, and her expression held no surprise at all. Cole asked how she knew what Ranger had found. The woman looked at the compass, then at the photograph in Cole's hand. "Because my father buried that compass 41 years ago," she said. "And the man in that picture came here after everyone believed he was dead." Ranger sat again, perfectly still, facing the frozen hillside, and this time Cole understood that the dog was not telling him to look at what had been buried. He was warning him that something behind it had been waiting far longer. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Shaw, though she said the name as if Cole might already know it. She drove slowly behind him as he and Ranger walked back toward the cabin, the old pickup rattling over frozen ruts while the first pale light reached across the valley. Inside, Cole fed another split log into the stove and set coffee to boil in a dented pot. Evelyn stood near the door, studying the room with the careful attention of someone revisiting a place she had once known well. Ranger remained between her and Cole, not threatening, only watchful. Evelyn noticed and lowered one hand so he could smell it. Ranger leaned forward, then relaxed. "Smart dog," she said. "Smarter than most people in this town." Cole placed the photograph and the brass compass on the kitchen table. "You said your father buried this." Evelyn nodded. Her father, Thomas Shaw, had worked as a surveyor across 3 counties before modern mapping equipment replaced most of the field crews. He knew every disputed fence line, every forgotten access road, and every family that had lost land after trusting the wrong signature. According to Evelyn, Thomas had spent his final years collecting records, but after his death, most of them disappeared from his house before she could sort through them. The compass was supposed to stay hidden, she said, until someone came with the right dog. Cole watched her carefully. "That sounds like something people say after the fact." Evelyn almost smiled. "My father said the animal would know where men had lied." She reached toward the photograph, but stopped before touching it. "Daniel Reed came to Red Hollow 12 years ago. He stayed 12 days. He asked questions about your family, my father, and a house that does not appear on any county map." Cole felt the room narrow around those words. He had attended Daniel's funeral before those 12 days could have happened. He remembered the folded flag, Daniel's mother gripping his hand, and the promise Cole had made beside a row of empty chairs. None of it allowed for a journey to Montana. Evelyn said Daniel had arrived exhausted, carrying a field bag and refusing to explain where he had been. Thomas gave him shelter in the same caretaker cabin Cole now occupied. Before Daniel left, he placed something inside the brass compass and told Thomas to bury it beneath the cedar. "Why did your father wait?" Cole asked. Evelyn looked toward the frosted window. "Because the wrong men were watching the ridge." Her old pickup refused to start when she tried to leave. The engine turned once, then gave a dry click. Cole followed her outside, lifted the hood, and found a loose battery connection white with corrosion. He cleaned it with a wire brush from his toolbox and tightened the clamp. The engine came alive on the second try. Evelyn offered him $20. Cole closed her fingers over the bill and pushed her hand gently back. "Keep it for gas." She studied him for a long moment, then glanced at Ranger. "My father would have liked both of you." A black sport utility vehicle appeared at the end of the road before she could drive away. It rolled to a stop beside the cabin, clean enough to look out of place among the snow and pines. The driver stepped out wearing polished boots and a dark wool coat. Evelyn's shoulders tightened. "Grant Hollis," she said quietly. Grant approached with the confident smile of a man who expected doors to open before he reached them. He looked at Cole, then at Ranger, and his expression changed for half a second. "Cole Mercer," he said. Cole had not introduced himself. Grant recovered quickly and explained that his development company had purchased several parcels near the ridge. He warned Cole that the service road crossed private property and that wandering beyond the marked boundary could create legal trouble. There were no markers anywhere Cole had seen. Grant's gaze shifted to the table visible through the cabin window, where the brass compass rested beside the photograph. "Old things cause confusion," he said, "especially when desperate people imagine they have value." Ranger moved one step forward. Grant snapped his fingers at him as though calling away a nuisance. Ranger did not growl. He simply turned, sat completely still, and stared at Grant with the same fixed attention he had given the frozen hillside. Evelyn saw it too. Grant left after reminding Cole that temporary shelter did not make him part of Red Hollow. That evening, Evelyn invited Cole to her farmhouse for supper. At exactly 5 o'clock, an old tabletop radio in her kitchen clicked on by itself. Static filled the room, followed by a recorded weather report from decades earlier. Then a man's voice broke through the hiss, slow and deliberate. "When Cole Mercer arrives, tell him the stone house is not the inheritance." Cole looked at Evelyn, but she had gone pale. The recording continued for 3 more words before the tape stopped. "It is the warning." The radio remained silent after the final word, leaving only the soft tick of cooling metal and the wind pressing against Evelyn's kitchen windows. Cole reached for the switch, but Evelyn stopped him. "It does that every evening," she said. "The weather report plays, then the tape resets. It has never said your name before." Ranger stood beside the table with his ears angled toward the radio, listening to something beneath the static that neither of them could hear. Cole lifted the brass compass from his coat pocket and placed it beside the radio. The needle turned once, trembled, then settled northwest. Evelyn opened a drawer and took out a yellowed notebook that had belonged to her father. Most pages contained survey measurements, fence descriptions, and hand-drawn property lines. Near the back, Thomas Shaw had written 3 phrases in block letters. 5 o'clock, follow the water, and the house has NO road. Beneath them was the same carved symbol Cole had seen on the compass. Evelyn said her father had repeated those words during the last winter of his life, but everyone assumed age and grief had confused him. Cole studied the lines until Ranger moved toward the back door and looked over his shoulder. The dog did not bark. He waited. Outside, the temperature had fallen to 17 degrees Fahrenheit, and the last daylight had faded behind the mountains. Evelyn insisted they wait until morning. Cole agreed, though sleep came slowly in the caretaker cabin. He lay on the narrow bed listening to the stove settle and watching the compass on the crate beside him. Daniel had always been careful with facts. He would not have left a message built on superstition. Somewhere between the photograph, the recording, and Thomas Shaw's notebook was a route designed for a man who understood how to follow instructions without trusting appearances. Before dawn, Cole packed water, a flashlight, a folding shovel, and 50 feet of rope. Ranger ate quickly, then paced near the door. They returned to Evelyn's farmhouse just as the eastern sky turned gray. She handed Cole a copy of the notebook page and pointed toward a narrow drainage channel behind her barn. Meltwater from the ridge followed it each spring before joining a creek 2 miles north. Follow the water, Cole said. Evelyn nodded. But there has not been running water up there since November. Ranger had already entered the channel. Snow covered most of the shallow trench, but the dog moved with purpose, stopping every few yards to test the air. Cole followed for nearly a mile, through pine shadows and low brush. The drainage channel gradually became a stone-lined cut too straight to be natural. Whoever had built it had shaped the slope to carry water away from the ridge. Halfway up, Cole found a broken length of clay pipe beneath the snow. Farther on, Ranger stopped beside a flat stone and sat completely still. Cole brushed away ice and found the mountain symbol carved into its surface. A narrow groove ran from the symbol toward a stand of cedar trees. The compass needle pointed in the same direction. Behind the cedars, the ground dropped into a shallow hollow hidden from the service road. Ranger descended first, then paused beside a wall of exposed rock. Cole saw no door, no foundation, and no path. Only stone darkened by years of weather. He was about to circle the hollow when Ranger lowered his nose to a gap beneath a fallen branch. Cole pulled the branch aside and uncovered a rusted metal ring set into the ground. Beneath it lay a small wooden box wrapped in decayed oilcloth. Inside was an iron key, black with age, and a narrow strip of green fabric faded almost gray. Cole recognized the stitching immediately. Daniel had repaired his field bag with that same uneven cross pattern during a long night overseas. The key was not large enough for a front door. It looked made for a desk, a cabinet, or a lockbox. One side bore a stamped emblem of 3 oak leaves above a letter H. Cole had seen the same design less than 24 hours earlier on the silver clasp of Grant Hollis's leather folder. Ranger lifted his head toward the ridge. The faint sound of an engine traveled through the trees. Cole closed the box and slipped the key into his pocket just before a vehicle stopped on the road above. Grant's voice carried down the slope, calm and close. You found it faster than Daniel did. Ranger turned toward the sound, but did not climb. Instead, he sat completely still beside the stone wall. Cole placed one hand against the cold rock in front of him and felt a thin current of warmer air moving through a crack. The wall was not solid, and Grant already knew exactly what was behind it. Grant's boots appeared first at the edge of the hollow, followed by the hem of his dark coat as he descended carefully through the cedars. He carried no shovel and showed no surprise at the carved stone, the rusted ring, or the warm air slipping through the crack in the rock. That told Cole more than any explanation could have. Ranger remained seated beside the wall, still and silent, his eyes fixed on Grant. You said yesterday you had never seen that compass, Cole said. Grant stopped 10 feet away. I said old things create confusion. That is not the same answer. For the first time, Grant's smile looked forced. He explained that his company had surveyed the ridge years earlier and found nothing except unstable ground and abandoned drainage work. According to him, Daniel had wandered onto the property asking questions, just as Cole was doing now. Some men lose enough, Grant said, and they start believing every locked door owes them something. Cole slipped the iron key deeper into his pocket. Then why did you know Daniel found this place? Grant glanced toward the hidden box before he could stop himself. The mistake lasted less than a second, but Cole saw it. Grant had not known Cole found the box until his eyes went to the exact patch of disturbed snow. He had been here before. Grant changed direction quickly, offering Cole $10,000 for the compass and photograph. He described it as payment for leaving the ridge, signing a simple statement, and avoiding a property dispute that could become expensive. Cole had $4.75 in his wallet, an overdue fuel bill folded beside it, and no guarantee the caretaker cabin would remain available past the end of the month. He thought of the sold tools, the empty business account, and the second metal cup he had returned to the cabinet. Then he looked at Ranger. The dog had not taken his eyes off Grant. No, Cole said. Grant pulled an envelope from his coat and held it out. You have not heard the number written inside. The number does not change the answer. Cole did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Grant lowered the envelope, and something cold entered his expression. He warned that Cole was trespassing and that the cabin belonged to a holding company connected to the development. One complaint could put Cole back on the road before nightfall. Cole answered that legal boundaries required markers and county records, neither of which Grant had produced. Grant looked at the wall again. You think that makes you clever? No, Cole said. I think it makes you nervous. A gust moved through the cedars, carrying the dry smell of pine and frozen earth. Grant left without another word, climbing toward the road with the envelope still in his hand. Ranger waited until the engine faded before standing. He moved to the crack in the stone and pressed his nose near the warm air. Cole did not try the key there. The lock, if one existed, was concealed, and forcing anything would give Grant the accusation he wanted. Instead, he photographed the carved symbol, the drainage channel, and the box's resting place with his phone. Then he covered the site exactly as he had found it. Back at Evelyn's farmhouse, he laid the iron key on her kitchen table. She recognized the oak leaf emblem immediately. The Hollis family had used it for more than 60 years on deeds, company seals, and private storage boxes. Grant's grandfather had served on the county land board when Thomas Shaw began collecting records. Evelyn opened another of her father's notebooks and showed Cole a list of families who had lost acreage after disputed loans or missing tax notices. Several names were marked with a small oak leaf. My father believed the same people who approved the seizures later bought the land through shell companies, she said. He could never prove where the original records went. Cole asked why Thomas had hidden the compass instead of going to the authorities. Evelyn looked toward the old radio. He did. The deputy who took his statement later became Grant's father-in-law. Before Cole could answer, Ranger rose from beside the stove and walked to the back window. Smoke was lifting beyond the trees in the direction of the caretaker cabin. Cole was out the door before Evelyn finished saying his name. By the time they reached the service road, orange light flickered inside the abandoned shed beside the cabin. The structure held little beyond split wood, a rusted mower, and several boxes Cole had not opened. Ranger pulled toward it, then stopped so suddenly that Cole nearly passed him. From inside came the scrape of claws against wood. Someone had shut the shed door with Ranger's blanket and food bowl inside, making it look as though the dog had been trapped there. But Ranger stood safely beside Cole. The warning was not meant to harm him. It was meant to prove that whoever had entered the cabin knew exactly how to frighten a man who had already lost everything. Cole opened the shed only after the small fire had burned itself low against the damp floor. Near the doorway, untouched by the heat, lay Grant's sealed envelope. This time it was open, and the $10,000 check was gone. In its place was a single sentence written in black ink. Leave the ridge, or next time you will lose what still follows you home. The smell of wet ash followed Cole long after the last ember in the shed went dark. He stood beneath the porch light with Ranger pressed close to his leg, the warning note folded in his pocket and the brass compass cold in his hand. Evelyn had called the county fire office, but the deputy who arrived treated the incident like careless heating rather than a message. He photographed the floor, asked 2 routine questions, and left before the wind covered the tire tracks near the shed. Cole said little. He had learned years earlier that some men listened only after evidence left them no choice. Inside the cabin, Ranger settled beside the stove, but Cole remained at the table. The smell of damp smoke had opened a door in his memory, carrying him back 12 years to a different night. when diesel, rain, and burned canvas hung in the air. Daniel Reed had sat across from him beneath a canvas shelter, repairing a torn field bag with green thread pulled from an emergency kit. His stitches were uneven, but he refused Cole's help. A man should know how to mend what carries his promises, Daniel had said. Cole remembered laughing at the line. Daniel had not. He reached into the repaired bag and removed a brass compass. The glass was unbroken then, and the needle moved cleanly beneath the lamp. On the back was the symbol of two peaks divided by a straight line. Daniel told Cole it belonged to his grandfather, though he would not say where the old man had gotten it. "There is a place in Montana," Daniel said. "A house made of stone where people hid the truth because the truth had nowhere safe to live." Cole assumed it was one of Daniel's family stories, the kind passed down until no one could separate memory from legend. Daniel looked toward the rain beyond the shelter. "If men from Red Hollow ever come asking about my family, do not give them anything. Not a name, not a map, not even a broken watch." Cole asked why anyone would come looking. Daniel answered with another question. "Would you protect a promise if keeping it cost more than breaking it?" Cole had told him yes, without hesitation. At the time, the answer felt simple. A week later, Daniel was gone from the unit. The official explanation arrived in careful language, followed by a memorial service and a folded flag delivered to his mother. Cole never saw the compass again. He carried the promise for years without understanding what it required, until grief slowly turned it into something he remembered only when the nights were quiet. Now the same compass rested beneath his fingers, and a strip from Daniel's repaired field bag had wrapped the key beneath the ridge. The past had not faded. Someone had arranged it. Ranger lifted his head when Cole opened the compass case. He removed the photograph and examined the lining more closely. Beneath the paper was a shallow groove shaped like the mountain symbol. Cole laid Evelyn's copied notebook page beside it and noticed that the straight line between the two peaks extended farther on Thomas Shaw's drawing. It was not a boundary. It was a route through the ridge, beginning at the drainage channel and ending beyond the stone wall. The compass had never been intended to identify ownership. It was meant to guide someone who already possessed the key. At first light, Cole and Evelyn returned to the shed. Rangers searched the damp ground while Cole moved the blackened boxes outside. Nothing valuable had been stored there, but one old crate held pieces of cut stone left by a previous caretaker. Ranger sniffed each one, then chose a fist-sized block darkened by smoke. He carried it across the yard and dropped it at Cole's feet. One edge had been shaped into a narrow angle. The same oak leaf emblem from the iron key was carved into its underside, almost invisible beneath soot. Evelyn stared at it. "My father used to call that a witness stone," she said. Surveyors placed such markers where property lines changed or records were disputed. Cole washed the soot away with melted snow. A series of small notches appeared along one side, matching the spacing of the marks in Thomas's notebook. When the stone was aligned with the compass, it indicated a second route that curved around the ridge instead of entering through the visible crack. The fire had not destroyed evidence. It had uncovered the piece Grant's warning was meant to make Cole overlook. Before noon, Ranger led them back toward the hollow. He carried the cleaned stone gently, then stopped at the place where the drainage channel disappeared beneath a fallen pine. Cole moved the branches and found a narrow opening framed by fitted rock. Warm air flowed from the darkness, carrying the dry scent of cedar, metal, and something undisturbed for years. Ranger set the witness stone beside the entrance and sat completely still. Cole placed the iron key against a hidden plate in the wall. A lock clicked from somewhere deep inside, and beyond the stone came the slow sound of a door beginning to open. The stone door moved inward with a grinding sound that seemed too large for the narrow opening. Dust drifted from the frame, but the air beyond was dry and strangely warm. Cole waited until the movement stopped, then raised his flashlight and stepped inside. Ranger went first by only a few feet, his paws silent on the fitted stone floor. Evelyn followed close behind, one hand touching the wall as if she needed proof that it was real. The passage curved through the ridge for nearly 30 yards before widening into a room built from gray blocks cut by hand. Shelves lined the walls. On them rested old survey tools, wooden boxes, rolled maps, and rows of glass jars filled with nails, buttons, coins, and small objects that looked ordinary until someone had gone to the trouble of preserving them. In the center stood a heavy table beneath a rusted hanging lamp. Cole found a hand crank on the wall and turned it slowly. After several pulls, the lamp flickered to life from a hidden generator system. Warm yellow light spread across the room. Evelyn covered her mouth. "My father described this," she whispered. "I thought grief had made him imagine it." Ranger moved from shelf to shelf, smelling the air, then stopped beside a large cedar chest bound with iron. The oak leaf emblem was stamped into its lid. Cole tried the key. The lock opened without resistance. Inside lay stacks of silver coins, several antique watches, sealed envelopes, and a leather folder containing copies of property deeds. Beneath them rested a document naming Daniel Reed as the last surviving heir to the stone house and every mineral claim attached to the ridge. A second page transferred those rights to Cole Mercer if Daniel died before taking possession. Evelyn read the lines twice. "This could be worth more than everything Grant took from you." Cole did not answer. His eyes remained on Daniel's signature. It looked right, but the date was impossible. The transfer had been signed 9 days after the memorial service. On the wall behind the chest hung a map showing underground seams marked with old mining symbols. Red pencil lines crossed several thousand acres surrounding Red Hollow. Some parcels carried the names of families from Thomas Shaw's notebook. Others belonged to companies connected to Grant. Cole felt the shape of the trap before he understood how it worked. The documents gave him wealth, land, and a reason to claim the house. They also made him look exactly like the desperate man Grant had described. Ranger left the chest and crossed to the far side of the room. He sat completely still over a narrow section of floor where the stone color changed by half a shade. Cole knelt and found a seam around a square slab. Before he could examine it, voices echoed through the passage. Grant entered with 2 county deputies and a woman carrying a leather case. Grant's expression shifted when he saw the open chest, but only for a moment. "I told you this was private property," he said. Cole stood and kept both hands visible. The deputies asked everyone to remain calm. Grant presented papers claiming his company owned the ridge and accused Cole of breaking into a secured structure to remove valuables. Cole pointed to the hidden door, the missing boundary markers, and the key tied to Grant's family emblem. Grant answered that stolen property often carried the owner's mark. The woman with the case introduced herself as a county attorney and began photographing the chest. She found the inheritance document within minutes. Grant read Cole's name aloud, making sure the deputies heard it. "There it is," he said. "A man facing bankruptcy discovers a fortune and somehow produces paperwork naming himself heir." Evelyn stepped forward and said the house had belonged to her father's trust. Grant asked for proof she did not have. Cole looked again at Daniel's signature. The ink appeared faded, but the paper beneath it was newer than the rest. Whoever placed the document inside expected someone to find it. "I am not claiming anything," Cole said. Grant laughed softly. "You opened the chest. Opening it is not ownership." Cole closed the folder and returned it to the cedar box. He told the deputies he would leave every object where it was until the records could be verified. Grant's confidence sharpened because refusal did not fit the story he had prepared. He demanded that Cole surrender the compass and key as evidence. Cole handed over neither. Ranger shifted his weight beside the discolored floor stone. A low mechanical click came from beneath him. The square slab dropped an inch, then slid sideways on hidden rails. Cold air rose from a black opening below. Everyone turned toward it. Grant's face lost all color. On the first step leading underground, carved deep into the stone, were 7 words. "The treasure is for the man who lies." For several seconds, no one moved. The words on the step seemed to change the temperature of the room. Grant recovered first. He called the inscription a theatrical trick and told the deputies the lower chamber might be unsafe. The county attorney crouched near the opening without touching it. "This structure predates every modern filing in your packet," she said. Grant replied that age did not determine ownership. Cole watched him carefully. Grant had gone pale before anyone read the sentence aloud. He already knew what waited below. Ranger remained beside the opening, still as carved stone. Cole shined his flashlight down the steps. They descended farther than the room above should have allowed, turning beneath the ridge into a second chamber lined with cedar panels. Unlike the first room, it held no coins, watches, or mineral maps. A single desk stood at the center. On it rested a thick public ledger beneath a glass cover, a wind-up recorder, and a narrow metal box with 7 separate keyholes. The wall behind the desk carried another message cut into the stone. Wealth tests the hand. Truth tests the name. Evelyn whispered that the wording sounded like her father. Grant ordered everyone back upstairs, claiming the chamber contained private company records. One deputy looked at him. "You just told us you had never been inside." Grant answered too quickly. "I said no such thing." The other deputy turned on his body camera and asked Grant to repeat his ownership claim clearly. Grant did, adding that everything above and below the ridge belonged to Hollis Development. Cole noticed the county attorney write down the exact words. Ranger stepped into the chamber and moved directly to the desk. He did not sniff the ledger or the metal box. Instead, he stopped before a loose cedar panel in the wall and sat. Cole knelt beside him. The panel opened with light pressure, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside lay Daniel Reed's military identification tag wrapped in the same faded green cloth that had covered the key. Evelyn made a quiet sound behind him. Cole held the tag beneath the flashlight. The stamped name, service number, and blood type were unmistakable. Daniel had carried an identical tag when Cole last saw him, but that one had been included among the personal effects returned to his family. This was not a duplicate made for display. A tiny notch at the bottom matched the mark Daniel had filed into both tags after confusing them during training years earlier. Cole remembered teasing him about it. Daniel had answered that anything worth identifying should carry a mark no clerk could copy. The room became very quiet. Grant said the tag proved nothing. Cole stood. "It proves Daniel came here after the date you said he died." Grant's eyes shifted toward the metal box. "Or someone planted it." "Someone did plant something," Cole said. He looked up toward the cedar chest above them. "The inheritance." The county attorney asked what he meant. Cole explained the paper difference, the impossible date, and the fact that the chest offered exactly what a ruined man would be expected to take: money, land, and a legal story that would make greed appear reasonable. The inscription on the stairs confirmed the design. The treasure was not a reward. It was bait. Anyone who claimed it before reading the ledger would publicly identify himself as the liar the house had been built to expose. Evelyn approached the desk and lifted the glass cover. The first page of the ledger contained only one paragraph. It stated that the silver, watches, and mineral deeds had been assembled from disputed holdings and could belong to no honest claimant until every name in the lower record was restored. Taking the treasure without opening the full account would bind the claimant to every false seizure attached to it. Grant stepped forward. "That has no legal force." The county attorney did not look at him. "Perhaps not by itself." She pointed toward the body camera. "But your sworn ownership claim might." For the first time, Grant stopped speaking. Cole turned the ledger page. Instead of property descriptions, it held a list of people, dates, and short handwritten notes. Some entries described widows pressured into signing away acreage. Others named veterans accused of debts they never owed. Near the bottom of the page appeared Daniel Reed's family name. Below it was Thomas Shaw's. Cole expected his own surname to follow, but the next line had been cut out with a careful blade. Only the first letter remained. Ranger left the desk and returned to the cedar wall. He pressed his nose to the compartment where Daniel's tag had been hidden. Cole reached farther inside and felt a second object taped beneath the ledge. It was a small photograph protected in waxed paper. Daniel stood outside the stone house beside Thomas Shaw, alive and older than he appeared in the funeral portrait. A date had been written across the back. It was 11 days after the service. Beneath it, in Daniel's handwriting, were 6 words: "Cole believes I am already gone." The photograph stayed in Cole's hand long after the others had finished examining it. Daniel's face carried the same tired half-smile Cole remembered, but there was something different in his posture. He was standing straight, not like a man recovering from hardship, but like someone who had made a decision and knew it would cost him. Thomas Shaw stood beside him with one hand on the stone wall and the other holding a folder against his chest. Behind them, the hidden doorway was open. Cole turned the picture over again, hoping the 6 words might change. They did not. "Cole believes I am already gone." Grant broke the silence by demanding that the photograph be placed into evidence. The county attorney agreed, but she asked Cole to photograph both sides first. Grant objected to that too. His objection was louder than the request required, and everyone in the chamber noticed. One deputy led him upstairs while the other remained near the ledger. Cole watched Grant leave, then looked at Evelyn. "You knew Daniel was here after the service." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I knew someone came. My father never used his name with me." She explained that Thomas had sheltered a wounded and exhausted veteran for 12 days in the caretaker cabin. Daniel rarely went outside before dark. He spent his nights comparing names, copying records, and recording messages on the old radio equipment in her father's workshop. Thomas told Evelyn only that the man had survived something the public record could not explain, and that powerful people would destroy the archive if they learned he was alive. "Why let me believe he was dead?" Cole asked. Evelyn's answer came quietly. "Because he asked my father to protect the work before he protected the friendship." The words landed harder than anger would have. Cole had carried Daniel's memory for 12 years. He had spoken to Daniel's mother at every Christmas until her death. He had blamed himself for not recognizing the weight behind Daniel's last questions. Now he was being asked to believe that Daniel had chosen silence, while Cole stood at a memorial believing there was nothing left to save. Ranger moved closer and rested his head against Cole's knee. Cole placed one hand behind the dog's ears and let the room grow quiet around them. No one rushed him. The steady warmth beside his leg reminded him that loyalty was not always explanation. Sometimes it was simply the choice to remain when the truth made standing difficult. The county attorney asked Evelyn whether Thomas had left other photographs or recordings. Evelyn hesitated, then admitted there was a locked cabinet in her barn that she had never opened. Her father had given her 7 small keys before he died, each labeled with a family name. She had assumed they belonged to old survey boxes, but the metal case in the chamber had 7 keyholes. One of the labels carried Daniel Reed's name. Another carried Cole Mercer's. Cole looked at the ledger page where a surname had been cut away. The surviving first letter matched his own. Evelyn said Thomas had warned her never to bring the keys to the stone house unless 3 conditions were met. The treasure had been refused, the ledger had been opened before witnesses, and someone from the Mercer family had arrived without asking for money. Cole had already met all 3 without knowing they existed. That realization shifted something inside him. Daniel had not merely hidden from him. He had prepared for him. Outside the chamber, the deputies allowed Grant to leave after taking his statement, but the county attorney ordered the stone house temporarily sealed pending review. She warned Cole not to return without authorization. Grant paused at the entrance and looked back at Evelyn. "You still have time to remember who pays the taxes on your farm," he said. Evelyn's face tightened, but she did not answer until his vehicle disappeared along the ridge. "He bought the note on my property 6 months ago," she told Cole. "If I testify, he can force a review and probably take the house." Cole asked whether she wanted to stop. Evelyn looked toward Ranger, who had returned to the hidden door and sat beneath the mountain symbol. "My father spent his life waiting for someone who would not take the chest," she said. "I will not spend mine helping the man who wanted it." That evening, they opened the cabinet in Evelyn's barn. Inside were the 7 keys, a bundle of survey maps, and a sealed envelope addressed to Thomas Shaw in Daniel's handwriting. Cole did not open it. The name written across the front was not Thomas's. It was his own. Beneath it, Daniel had added a date 12 years earlier in one sentence. "Read this only after you learn why your father was called a thief." Cole carried Daniel's envelope back to the caretaker cabin, but left it sealed on the table beside the brass compass. The instruction was clear. He had to learn why his father had been called a thief before he read what Daniel wanted him to know. Cole had been 16 when the accusation reached their home in Idaho. His father, Samuel Mercer, had worked as an independent bookkeeper for a veterans land cooperative that helped families manage taxes, loans, and inherited acreage. One winter morning, county investigators arrived and removed boxes of records from his office. By the end of the week, local newspapers reported that thousands of dollars were missing. No charges were ever proven in court, but the damage came faster than any verdict. Clients stopped calling. Neighbors avoided the grocery aisle when Samuel entered. He died 3 years later with the accusation still attached to his name. Cole had spent half his life believing his father had either made a terrible mistake or trusted the wrong person. Now Daniel's message suggested someone had built the lie deliberately. At sunrise, the county attorney called. She had obtained authorization for Cole, Evelyn, and both deputies to re-enter the stone house under supervision. Grant's attorney had objected, But the body camera recording of Grant claiming everything beneath the ridge had made the judge unwilling to leave the chamber unexamined. Evelyn brought the 7 keys from her barn. Each was cut differently and carried a small paper label faded by age. They descended to the lower room while snow tapped softly against the hidden entrance. The metal box waited on the desk with its 7 keyholes arranged in a circle. Cole expected the locks to open one at a time, but nothing happened until every key was inserted. Evelyn turned hers first. The deputies followed the labels Thomas had written, and Cole turned the key bearing his family name last. A mechanism clicked inside the box, yet the lid remained closed. Ranger walked around the desk, sniffing the floor and cedar walls. Then his ears lifted. A faint ticking came from behind the old stone fireplace at the back of the chamber. No fire had burned there for years, but Ranger crossed to it and sat completely still. Cole knelt beside the hearth and found one stone warmer than those around it. The county attorney photographed the wall before allowing him to touch anything. The stone shifted under gentle pressure. Behind it was a narrow cavity holding a wind-up recorder, 3 sealed ledgers, and a metal tube wrapped in oilcloth. The ticking came from the recorder, which had begun moving when the 7 keys turned. Cole set it on the desk. Evelyn recognized her father's voice first. Thomas Shaw stated the date, named the witnesses who had helped him preserve the records, and explained that the cedar chest above had been designed as a test. Anyone who claimed the treasure before opening the lower archive would reveal that profit mattered more to him than the families listed inside. Then Daniel's voice entered the recording. It was older, quieter, but unmistakable. He said the ledgers contained original loan agreements, tax notices, and payment receipts showing that several veterans' widows had been declared delinquent even after paying in full. Properties were seized, transferred through temporary companies, and later purchased by members of the Hollis family. Samuel Mercer had discovered the pattern while auditing the cooperative. He copied the records and planned to testify, but forged withdrawal slips were placed under his employee number. The missing money had never entered his account. It had been moved through a land company controlled by Grant's father. Cole closed his eyes. For years he had remembered his father sitting alone at the kitchen table, sorting receipts no one wanted to see. Samuel had not been hiding guilt. He had been trying to prove innocence with documents already replaced by copies. Ranger pressed his shoulder against Cole's arm. Daniel's recording continued. He said Samuel had sent 1 package of originals to Red Hollow before the investigation began. Thomas hid them inside the stone house. Daniel later returned to secure the archive because the fraud had expanded beyond old land seizures. New development companies were using the same false debt system to force owners into quick sales. The county attorney opened the first ledger. Samuel's careful handwriting filled several pages, with dates, bank references, and names of families who had lost farms and cabins. The second ledger contained Thomas's surveys. The third held recent transactions. Near the final page was a filing signed by Grant Hollis only 3 months earlier. It showed that Grant's company had purchased the false debt attached to Evelyn's farm and had prepared a similar claim against the caretaker property before Cole arrived. The lawsuit that destroyed Cole's business was listed as an acquisition expense. Grant had not discovered Cole by chance. He had targeted him because the Mercer name remained connected to the last access route into the archive. The county attorney read the page twice, then asked a deputy to seal every document as evidence. Cole finally opened the metal tube. Inside was Samuel Mercer's original audit and a notarized statement clearing every missing dollar. Beneath it lay a recent demolition request bearing Grant's signature. The order authorized work on the ridge the following morning, and the stated reason was unstable stone. Ranger turned toward the passage before anyone heard the vehicle above. A moment later, the sound of heavy machinery rolled across the frozen ground. The machinery stopped before it reached the ridge. One deputy climbed the stairs first, followed by the county attorney, while Cole remained below with Evelyn and Ranger beside the sealed evidence. Voices carried through the passage, firm but controlled. Grant had arrived with a demolition crew and an emergency work order, claiming the structure posed an immediate public hazard. The county attorney answered that the site was under active evidence protection and that any disturbance would violate the preservation order signed less than an hour earlier. Grant argued that his request had been approved the previous afternoon. She held up the document from the metal tube. "That is the problem," she said. You authorized demolition before the instability inspection was completed, and your stated reason appears nowhere in the engineer's report. The engine outside shut down. Silence settled over the chamber again. Cole looked at the open ledgers, the notarized audit clearing his father's name, and Daniel's unopened letter resting inside his jacket. For the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, he could see the whole pattern. Grant had not expected anyone to refuse the cedar chest. He had expected Cole to claim the inheritance, appear greedy, and give the Hollis Company a reason to seize every document as part of a property dispute. When Cole refused, Grant moved to destroy the ridge before the lower archive could be examined. Each decision had been built around the belief that a man who had lost everything would reach for the first thing that looked like repayment. Grant had never considered that Cole might value the truth more than the fortune. By late afternoon, the county attorney had arranged for the records to be transported to the courthouse in sealed containers. She scheduled an emergency public hearing for the following evening because several deeds affected current residents and because Grant's ownership claim had been recorded on a deputy's body camera. Evelyn agreed to testify. Her hands shook when she signed the witness statement, but her voice did not. "My father waited 41 years for someone to open the ledger," she said. "I will not ask him to wait one day longer." At the caretaker cabin, Cole found Grant sitting on the porch rail as though he had been invited. Ranger stopped in the yard and watched him. Grant held a new envelope, thicker than the first. He said the demolition crew had left and that no one needed another misunderstanding. Inside the envelope were documents offering to restore Cole's contracting license, pay every outstanding debt, replace his equipment, and transfer the stone house and 20 surrounding acres into his name. The amount listed for business recovery was $275,000. "You can have your life back," Grant said. "All I need is the ledger before tomorrow's hearing." Cole did not open the packet farther. "You told the county attorney the ledger belongs to you. Ownership is complicated. Not when you are speaking under oath." Grant's expression tightened. He reminded Cole that public accusations could drag on for years. Evelyn might lose her farm before any court untangled the filings. Cole's father's name might remain in dispute. The town might decide that an outsider with no home and no business was not worth believing. "You know how this ends," Grant said. "People protect what feeds them." Cole placed the envelope on the porch beside the brass compass. The needle settled toward the ridge. "Then tomorrow they can decide what they are protecting." Grant stood slowly. "You could walk into that hearing with money, property, and your name restored." Cole looked toward Ranger. "A name bought from the man who buried it is not restored." Grant left without the envelope. After dark, Cole sat on the cabin floor beside the stove while Ranger slept with his head across Cole's boot. Snow moved softly against the windows. Cole finally opened Daniel's letter, but the first page contained only one sentence. "Do not read the rest until the truth is spoken where everyone can hear it." Beneath the sentence was a list of 7 names, all connected to the keys in the metal box. Evelyn Shaw was one of them. Walter Crane was another, a retired surveyor Cole had never met. At 5 minutes past midnight, Martha Bell, the town clerk, called from the courthouse. She had found Walter's address and arranged for him to attend the hearing. Then her voice changed. The evidence containers had arrived, but when she opened the secure room for inventory, one of them was missing. Cole drove the 8 miles into town with Ranger beside him. The courthouse hallway smelled of floor wax and cold coffee. Martha waited near the evidence room, pale and furious. The lock showed no damage. Only 3 people had signed the access log, and one signature belonged to a deputy assigned by Grant's father-in-law years earlier. Cole opened the remaining containers. The original ledgers, Samuel's audit, and Daniel's recorder were gone. In their place lay Grant's offer packet and a handwritten note accusing Cole of planting false evidence for money. Ranger entered the room, crossed to the empty shelf, and sat completely still. Then he turned his head toward a ventilation grate near the floor. From somewhere inside the wall came the faint, steady ticking of Daniel's recorder. The ticking behind the courthouse wall was faint, but Ranger held his position as if it were a command. Martha Bell knelt beside the ventilation grate and removed 2 screws with a pocket tool from her desk. Cole lifted the metal cover carefully. A narrow service passage ran behind the evidence room, wide enough for electrical lines and old heating ducts. Daniel's recorder rested several feet inside beside one of the missing evidence bags. Whoever had hidden it there had been interrupted or had planned to retrieve it later. Martha called the county attorney before anyone touched the passage. Within 20 minutes, both deputies arrived, along with a state investigator who had been notified after the demolition order raised concerns about evidence tampering. The remaining bags were found farther inside the wall. Samuel Mercer's audit was intact. 2 ledgers were present. The third, containing Grant's recent transactions, was missing. The access log deputy denied moving anything, but his own key card record placed him inside the secure hallway after midnight. He was removed from duty pending investigation. Cole said nothing while the officers sealed the recovered materials. Ranger had found enough to keep the hearing alive, but the document bearing Grant's signature was still gone. By the following evening, every seat in the Red Hollow meeting hall was filled. Farmers stood along the walls. Veterans from nearby counties sat near the front beside widows whose family names appeared in Thomas Shaw's ledger. Local reporters positioned cameras near the back. Grant arrived with 2 attorneys and took a seat at the long table facing the town council. Cole entered through the side doors with Ranger beside him. The room quieted when the dog crossed the floor and sat at Cole's left side. The brass compass rested on the evidence table between them. Grant rose first and repeated the accusation he had prepared. He said Cole had entered private land, opened a chest of valuables, and manufactured documents to support a false inheritance. He displayed the offer packet found in the evidence room and claimed it proved Cole intended to trade silence for money. One council member asked why Grant's own signature appeared on the packet. Grant answered that it had been part of a legitimate settlement discussion. Then you offered $275,000 to a man you are calling a trespasser, Martha said from the witness table. Grant's attorney objected, but the room had already heard the contradiction. The county attorney played the body camera recording from the stone house. Grant's voice filled the hall, clearly claiming everything above and below the ridge as Hollis property. The audience shifted when the inscription from the lower chamber appeared on the projector screen. The treasure is for the man who lies. Grant dismissed the words as folklore. Then Evelyn testified. She described Thomas Shaw's records, Daniel's arrival, and the 7 keys kept in her barn. Her voice shook only once, when Grant's attorney asked whether fear of losing her farm had influenced her story. Evelyn looked directly at Grant. Fear influenced my silence for 41 years, she said. It does not influence what I am saying tonight. The first ledger was entered into the public record. Name after name appeared on the screen, each followed by a seized property, a false debt, or a missing payment receipt. The second ledger showed survey lines altered after land transfers. Samuel's notarized audit proved that the money blamed on him had moved through a company controlled by Grant's father. Cole listened without moving. The truth he had wanted since he was 16 was being spoken aloud before people who could not pretend they had never heard it. Grant leaned toward his attorney and whispered something that made the man close his folder. Then the county attorney announced that the most recent ledger remained missing. A murmur moved through the hall. Grant sat back as if the absence proved his innocence. Without that document, he said, there is no evidence connecting me to anything. Ranger's ears moved forward. He stood, left Cole's side, and crossed the floor. Several people gasped when the dog passed Grant's table without looking at him. Ranger stopped beside an elderly man seated alone near the rear aisle and sat completely still. The man wore a brown canvas coat and held an old survey case across his knees. Martha checked the witness list. Walter Crane, she said. The retired surveyor rose slowly. He explained that Thomas Shaw had asked him to preserve duplicates in case the stone house was compromised. Walter opened the case and removed a bound ledger wrapped in waxed cloth. I kept this hidden for 38 years, he said. Last night, I received a call telling me the house had finally chosen an honest man. The county attorney compared the pages with photographs taken before the evidence disappeared. They matched. On the final sheet was Grant's signature beneath the purchase of Evelyn's false debt, the lawsuit expense against Cole's company, and the demolition authorization for the ridge. Daniel's recorder was placed on the table. His voice filled the hall, naming the scheme and explaining why the archive had been built. It was not created to preserve treasure. It was created to restore the names and homes of people who had been robbed while serving their country or waiting for those who did. Cole's father was one of them. Grant's attorney stood, removed his representation notice from the table, and walked away. Grant remained seated as the crowd turned toward him. Then, trying to save himself, he pointed at Cole and said the stone house still belonged to Hollis Development. Cole looked at the brass compass, then at the ledger containing every debt attached to the property. On that point, he said quietly, I agree with you. The room held its breath after Cole agreed that the stone house belonged to Hollis Development. Grant looked toward the council as though Cole had surrendered. Cole let the silence settle before he continued. If Mr. Hollis owns the house, he said, then he owns the full chain of title attached to it. Walter Crane opened the duplicate ledger to the final section. The county attorney explained that the stone house had never been separated from the disputed land records preserved inside it. Each transfer, false debt, and concealed obligation followed the property through every company that claimed ownership. Grant's public statement, his signed filings, and his recorded demand over everything above and below the ridge created a problem no attorney could erase. He had sworn that the house was his. By doing so, he had tied Hollis Development to every fraudulent transaction documented in the archive. One council member asked whether that meant Grant could be forced to answer for debts created before he was born. The county attorney shook her head. Not for the original acts, she said, but for the recent filings he repeated, the false claims he purchased, the records he attempted to destroy, and the benefits his company continued to collect. She lifted the final page. These signatures are his. Grant stood and declared that he had relied on employees and inherited records. Walter answered that the disputed boundaries had been brought to Grant personally 3 times. Martha produced certified notices from the county office, each signed as received. Evelyn placed her mortgage file on the table and showed that Grant's company had bought a debt already marked paid in full. The state investigator added that the demolition request had been submitted before any engineer declared the ridge unsafe. Every explanation Grant offered opened another page bearing his name. He had spent years protecting himself with layers of paperwork. Now those same layers formed a path leading directly back to him. Grant turned toward Cole. You planned this. Cole remained standing beside Ranger. I did not write your signatures. Grant said Cole wanted the mineral rights and had manipulated the town to take them. Cole looked at the cedar chest displayed in photographs on the screen, then at the families seated along the front rows. I am refusing every claim made in my name, he said. A murmur moved through the hall. Cole stated clearly that he would not accept the silver, the land, the house, or the mineral interests listed in the false inheritance. He asked that any recoverable assets be placed into an independent restitution trust for the families whose property had been taken. He also requested that the ridge be protected until the courts completed their review. Grant stared at him as though refusal were a language he could not understand. You lost your home, your business, everything, he said, and you are walking away from millions. Cole looked down when Ranger leaned lightly against his leg. No, he said, I am walking away from what was never mine. The first person to stand was Evelyn. She did not applaud. She simply rose and faced Cole with both hands resting on her cane. Walter stood next. Then the veterans in the front row rose, followed by the widows, farmers, clerks, and families whose names had been read from the ledger. The sound of chairs moving across the wooden floor spread through the hall until nearly everyone was standing. Ranger turned his head slowly, taking in the room. Cole remained still beneath their attention, his hand resting near the dog's shoulder. The moment did not feel like victory. It felt like a burden finally being shared. Grant was asked to remain after the hearing while the state investigator reviewed the evidence preservation orders and recent filings. His development permits were suspended pending audit. The false debt on Evelyn's farm was frozen, and the county announced an emergency review of every parcel connected to Hollis Development. No one dragged Grant away. No one shouted at him. He sat alone at the long table while the documents he had signed were read into the public record one by one. His consequences came through the exact system he had used against others. Before the council adjourned, Martha brought the brass compass to Cole. The cracked needle no longer trembled. It pointed steadily toward the ridge. Outside, snow had begun falling in slow, quiet flakes. People gathered around Cole and Ranger beneath the courthouse lights, offering work, tools, and places to stay. Cole thanked them, but accepted nothing yet. Evelyn waited until the crowd thinned, then handed him Daniel's sealed letter. There is one recording left, she said. My father kept it separate because Daniel said it was never meant for a courtroom. Cole looked at the envelope he had carried unopened through the hearing. Ranger sat beside him, no longer watching the courthouse or the crowd. For the first time since they reached Red Hollow, the dog faced the road toward the stone house and stood before Cole gave the command. Evelyn touched the envelope once. "Daniel did not only leave you the truth about your father," she said. "He left you the reason he chose that mountain for your home." At dawn, Cole and Ranger followed Evelyn back to the ridge beneath a sky the color of cold steel. The county had posted temporary protection notices along the service road, and yellow survey flags marked the boundary where crews would begin documenting every stone, passage, and record. For the first time, no one tried to stop them. Inside the lower chamber, Evelyn placed a small reel recorder on the desk beside the public ledger. Thomas Shaw had kept it in a locked drawer for 12 years with instructions that only Cole could hear it. Cole opened Daniel's letter first. The paper carried 3 short paragraphs in the careful handwriting he remembered. Daniel wrote that surviving a mission had never frightened him as much as returning home with the knowledge that honest families were still being robbed through forged debt and quiet intimidation. He had learned that Samuel Mercer discovered the scheme years earlier and paid for that truth with his reputation. Daniel also knew Cole would try to repair every wrong alone if he ever found the archive. That was why the stone house had been designed to test him before it trusted him. The final line read, "A home is not what a man owns. It is what still welcomes him after he refuses what was never his." Evelyn turned the recorder on. Daniel's voice entered the chamber through a soft layer of static. He said the ridge had once been used by veterans returning from earlier wars who needed work, shelter, and time to rebuild lives that no longer fit the places they had left. Thomas wanted the house preserved, not as a monument, but as a practical refuge where people could receive legal help, repair tools, share meals, and sleep without being treated like a burden. Daniel believed Cole would understand that purpose because he had spent his life fixing what others abandoned. "You will think I left you a mystery," Daniel said. "I did not. I left you a job worth coming home for." Cole sat quietly after the recording ended. Ranger rested beside him, his breathing steady in the warm chamber. Cole had imagined many endings since the compass appeared beneath the snow. None involved millions of dollars. None needed to. Within 3 months, the state audit froze every fraudulent parcel transfer connected to Hollis Development. Evelyn's farm was cleared of the false debt. Several families received restored titles, while others received settlements funded by seized company assets and insurance bonds. Grant faced charges related to recent forged filings, evidence tampering, and the attempted destruction of protected records. The older crimes belonged to another generation, but the choices bearing his own signature were enough. Cole never attended the hearings that followed. He had already spoken once in public, and the truth no longer needed his anger to survive. Red Hollow formed an independent trust for the ridge. The stone house became the Mercer Shaw Veterans Resource Center, though Cole asked that Daniel's name be placed above the workshop door. Lawyers volunteered one Saturday each month. Retired tradesmen repaired equipment in the upper room. Families brought soup, coffee, blankets, and work boots. A spare bedroom was added beside the caretaker cabin for veterans passing through town. Cole rebuilt his contracting business slowly, one porch, barn, and roof at a time. The first people to hire him were the same neighbors who had stood at the hearing. He accepted fair payment, refused charity, and hired 2 younger veterans before winter ended. Evelyn kept the old radio in the kitchen of the stone house. At 5 o'clock each evening, the weather report still played, but Thomas's hidden message never returned. It no longer needed to. On the first warm morning of spring, Cole mounted the brass compass above the entrance. The cracked glass remained untouched. Beneath it, Walter installed a simple wooden plaque bearing Samuel Mercer's full name and the words cleared by the record he preserved. Cole stood before it longer than anyone noticed. Then he took 2 metal cups from the kitchen shelf and filled both with coffee. He carried one outside for Evelyn and kept the other in his hand as Ranger moved toward the ridge. The dog reached the place where he had first refused to go forward. He paused, looked back at Cole, and waited. Cole expected him to sit completely still, the familiar warning before another buried truth. Ranger did not sit. He turned toward the trail and walked ahead into the morning light. Cole followed. Below them, the stone house doors stood open, and voices carried from the workshop where people were already beginning another day. He had arrived in Red Hollow with $4.75, no business, no home, and a name burdened by a lie. He remained because a loyal dog had found the place where truth was waiting, and because one friend had understood that Cole did not need an inheritance. He needed a reason to stay. What greed buries, loyalty brings back into the light.